My name is Orlena Merrick. I am 88 years old, and I used to be the kind of woman who baked peach pies from scratch every Saturday and ironed her linen napkins on Sundays just in case someone dropped by. No one drops by anymore. I live alone now, in a modest single-story home just outside Marlow, Tennessee. Brick siding, green shutters, the same wraparound porch my husband built with his bare hands in 1962, long before cancer came for him and left me with a silence too big for one house. But even with all that space, I never stopped saving room for them. My children, Caleb, Lydia, these 3 voices that once filled this home with chaos and laughter. Now it's just my wind chimes and the hum of the fridge. Sunday after Sunday, I'd sit in my recliner, always in the blue one, and wait. Phone on the side table, volume all the way up, candle lit, a cake sometimes made just in case. They used to call. On birthdays, on Mother's Day, on Sundays after church. But then life got busy. Lydia had twins. Reese moved to Seattle. Caleb stopped answering altogether. They promised it wasn't personal. "Mom, you know how things are," Lydia would say. "Been slammed at work," Reese would mumble in a rushed voicemail. "I meant to call, just forgot," Caleb wrote in a 2-line text on Christmas. Still I waited. I waited through surgeries and lonely holidays. Through quiet birthdays and long aching nights where I talked to Samuel's urn like it was still his side of the bed. I waited even after the stroke. Especially after the stroke. That morning I had tried to reach Lydia. I felt the numbness creeping down my arm like ice water. I thought surely if I called my daughter she'd answer. She didn't. Neither did Reese. Or Caleb. The paramedics found me alone, slumped near the kitchen counter. Phone still clutched in my hand with 3 missed calls that never connected. When I woke up in the hospital, my first thought wasn't, "Am I alive?" It was, "Where were they?" It was in that sterile hospital bed, staring at the rain smearing the window, that something hardened in me. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Just knew. They had written me off. So I started making plans. Because if my voice didn't matter to them while I was breathing, then maybe, just maybe, my silence would be heard after I was gone. That was the day I called Fletcher Kane. Not many folks know Fletcher's name, but around here, he's the host of the Southern Legacy Hour, a regional television show that broadcasts family reunions, inheritance stories, and heartwarming endings for the masses. Think Hallmark meets small-town gossip. I didn't care about fame. Cared about impact. I told Fletcher I wanted to make a public announcement, a special segment about gratitude, family, and legacy. But really what I wanted was one final stage. One final moment to remind them who I was. He agreed. We planned it for the week after my birthday. Special taping. Live. Unedited. With all 3 children present. Invited under the pretense of honoring my life and legacy with a sweet televised family tribute. They accepted. Course they did. Cameras. Chance to look good. An old mother with a will to be read on air. Suddenly they had time. Suddenly I was important again. And I smiled just a little at the irony. Because they thought they were coming to receive something. But they had no idea what I had already taken back. See, I had changed my will. Completely. The lawyer nearly dropped his pen when I told him. "You're leaving them nothing?" he asked. I smiled, slow and calm. "No," I said. "I'm leaving them exactly what they left me." "Which is?" I looked him in the eye. Silence. The morning of the live taping, I got dressed like it was Sunday again. Press slacks. Lavender blouse. My locket with Samuel's picture nestled against my chest. I stepped into the studio with my cane and my dignity, nodding to Fletcher like an old war general reporting for duty. The children were seated in the front row. Lydia, overdressed in something expensive and itchy-looking. Reese, checking his phone even while the cameras were rolling. And Caleb, pretending this was some burden he was too noble to complain about. They smiled for the audience, held my hand, kissed my cheek, and I smiled back, quietly, knowing they had no idea what was coming. Because when Fletcher cleared his throat and read my final wishes, I knew the words would land like thunder in a summer sky. Not out of vengeance, out of clarity, out of justice, out of love, finally directed where it mattered. And just before he spoke, I turned to the camera, looked into the lens like I was staring into every Sunday I spent waiting, and whispered, "They didn't hear me while I was alive. Maybe now they will." You don't forget the first time your children start treating you like background noise. Doesn't happen all at once. It's not like one day they call you mom, and the next day you're just a voicemail. No, it slips in slowly, like a draft under a door. A forgotten holiday, missed call, a birthday text instead of a visit. And before you know it, the silence becomes the rhythm of your life. I remember the last time all three of them came for Sunday dinner. It was April, years ago now. Spring had just begun to shake the frost off the windows, and I had gone all out. Pot roast, sweet corn pudding, my homemade biscuits with molasses butter. I even dug up the old blue and white plates Samuel bought me when we first got married. I spent 2 days preparing everything. And they were late. Lydia was the first to arrive. She burst through the door with her phone glued to her ear and a tote bag full of laundry her nanny didn't have time to fold. She kissed my cheek without really looking at me and dropped the bag by the stairs. "Love you, Mom," she mouthed while nodding at whoever was on the other end of the call. Reese followed 20 minutes later. He brought his new boyfriend, who I hadn't even known existed. I was delighted to meet him, but Reese looked irritated, like my excitement was embarrassing. They sat on the couch and scrolled through their phones while I finished setting the table. And Caleb, he never came. Sent a text 2 hours late. "Sorry Mom, emergency at work. Next week for sure. Love you." Next week never came. I ate alone that night. The roast went cold. The biscuits hardened. The plate stayed full, but the seat stayed empty. That was the beginning of the unraveling. I started noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. Lydia only called when she needed something. Help with the twins, a loan for her bakery project that she promised would be a family legacy, which folded in 8 months. Reese called when he had something to announce. Moving to New York, buying a condo, publishing a piece in some magazine I couldn't pronounce. He never asked how I was doing. He never asked if I needed anything. Caleb disappeared the most completely. Once Samuel died, Caleb seemed to bury every memory of me along with him. We used to be close. He was always my quiet one, the boy who sat with me in the kitchen for hours, asking me about the world. But after his divorce, it was like he vanished into his own silence. Kept calling though. Every Sunday. Every birthday. Every Mother's Day. Some days I'd just leave a message telling them about the tomatoes in the garden. Some days I'd say nothing at all. Just the sound of my voice, hoping they'd remember what I sounded like. Sometimes I'd leave the phone on the table while I made dinner, pretending someone would call back before dessert. They never did. I used to blame myself. Maybe I was too clingy, too opinionated, too old-fashioned. Maybe I'd said something wrong, forgotten some modern rule about boundaries. But then I remembered something Samuel used to say. You didn't stop being a mother when they stopped being children. And he was right. So I mothered them the only way I could. Through reminders, voicemails, handwritten cards, and prayer. Until the stroke. That was when the illusion finally broke. It was the 4th of July weekend. I was making potato salad and lemonade for myself. Nothing big. Just tradition. When the sharpness in my left arm hit, I thought it was heartburn. But the pain shot down so fast I could barely scream. I tried calling Lydia first. Voicemail. Then Reese. Voicemail. Then Caleb. Rang twice. Then silence. I dialed 911 with my one working hand. When the paramedics asked if there was someone they should call, I handed them my phone. They left messages. No one called back until 3 days later, after I'd been discharged. I remember lying there in that stiff hospital bed, staring up at the ceiling, thinking, they only want the parts of me that make them feel good. The rest they discard. That was the last Sunday I ever waited by the phone. Instead, I used that time to write letters. Not to them but to myself. Letters of grief. Of anger. Of memories I didn't want to take to the grave without someone hearing them. I documented everything. The missed birthdays. The forgotten hospital stays. The silence. And then I wrote a new will. With a different kind of family in mind. The girl from the pharmacy who walked me to my car every Thursday when it rained. The mailman who fixed my garden gate without charging me a dime. My old neighbor's son, Brandon, who helped me set up a new TV and stayed to watch a movie when he saw the look in my eyes. These people. They weren't blood. But they showed up. They called. They asked. They listened. And that's when it clicked. Legacy isn't about DNA. It's about presence. About showing up when it matters. So I rewrote everything. My lawyer blinked 3 times when I told him. You're cutting out all 3 children, he asked. I'm not cutting anyone, I said. I'm just finally investing in people who showed up. And the live reveal. Smiled. Let the cameras roll. The night before the taping, I sat on the porch and looked out at the sunset. No one called. No one texted. And for the first time in a long while I didn't care. Because this time they were coming to me. And they had no idea that the woman they thought was fragile and forgettable was about to take center stage and remind them exactly who raised them. And what silence really sounds like when it's echoed on television. If this moment pulled you deeper into my story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. They arrived in polished cars and practiced smiles. Lydia stepped out first, in 4-inch heels and an ivory blazer, clutching a designer bag like she was heading to a charity luncheon instead of her mother's will reading. Reese followed, still glued to his phone. He didn't look up until a producer politely asked him to power it off. Caleb came last, late of course, with a furrowed brow and that strained look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. It had been 3 years since all 3 of my children had been in the same room together. The last time was Samuel's funeral. Even then, they didn't sit near one another. Just stood around awkwardly, as if grief were a dress rehearsal they didn't prepare for. But this time they were united by one thing. Expectation. They thought the cameras were rolling to honor me. They thought this was a sweet old tribute, some nostalgic send-off they could clip and post on social media with captions like, "So blessed to have had a mom like her." What they didn't know was that the tribute wasn't for them. It was for the people who showed up, who held my hand when I had tremors, who learned the names of my medications, who helped me shovel snow, fix a light bulb, and bring groceries when my hip acted up. People who weren't bound to me by blood, but by kindness. Fletcher, the host of the Southern Legacy Hour, met me in the green room before the taping. He took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I waited too long already," I said. We opened with a montage. Photos of me and Samuel, baby pictures of the children, clips from our old home movies. I watched them all with a detached calm, like I was seeing someone else's life. Because the woman in those videos was surrounded by laughter, joy, noise. I hadn't heard that kind of noise in a long time. When the camera cut back to the studio, Fletcher leaned toward me gently. "Mrs. Merrick," he said, "you've invited your children here for a very special announcement." I turned to face the audience. The room was warm with studio lights, but my palms were cold. "My name is Orlena Merrick," I began, my voice steady, "and I am 88 years old. For the past 10 years, I've waited by the phone every Sunday, hoping my children would call just to say hello. I've waited on birthdays. I've waited in hospitals. I've waited while recovering from a stroke. And most of the time, I waited alone." A hush fell over the audience. Reese sat up straighter. Lydia's jaw tightened. Caleb crossed his arms. I continued. "I used to think that love was about blood. About who you raise, who you feed, who you carry through fevers and school dances and heartbreak. I believed that no matter how busy life gets, the people you raised would remember to call on your birthday." Pause. They didn't. Lydia let out a soft, nervous laugh. "Mom, is this?" "Please don't interrupt," I said, turning to her with a gaze that stilled her tongue. "I invited you here today," I continued, "not just to honor my life, but to inform you of something important." Fletcher stepped forward, holding a sleek envelope. "My updated will," I said, nodding toward it. "I had it rewritten 2 months ago." I watched the flicker of confusion cross Reese's face, followed by curiosity, then caution. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "And I delivered it. As of today, I am leaving my entire estate, not to my children, but to the people who showed up. To the nurse who checked on me every week even when her shift ended. To my neighbor's boy, Brandon, who installed my new stair railings and stayed for tea. To the pharmacist who made sure I never missed a refill and who called when I didn't show up one Friday. These people didn't share my blood. But they shared their time, their hearts, their presence." The audience gasped. Lydia's face flushed. She opened her mouth again, but I held up a hand. "You left me long before I left you," I said. "So I'm simply returning the favor." Reese muttered. "This is a stunt." I turned to him, my voice soft. "You posted about my last birthday on Facebook, Reese. But you didn't call. You live 2 time zones away. You send a post. That's what I meant to you. A public gesture with no voice behind it." He looked away. "And Caleb," I said, my heart tightening. "You disappeared. You didn't even come when the stroke happened. I know you were in town. I know you had dinner 2 blocks away. But I wasn't worth the 10-minute detour." He sank in his seat. "Lydia," I said gently, "I held your hand through every heartbreak. I gave you money for your business, helped raise your babies. And when I couldn't drive after surgery, I asked for a ride to the doctor. You said you were busy." "I was," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "You always were." The studio was silent now. Every camera caught their faces, their frozen expressions, the realization setting in. Fletcher unfolded the will. "Witnessed, notarized, and filed," he said. "On record." I turned to the audience. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about recognition. I want my final act to reflect my truth. That love isn't owed. It's earned." The applause came slowly, then like a wave. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stood and walked off that stage on my own 2 feet. Later in the hallway, Caleb followed me. He looked lost, like the boy who used to run to me when the thunder was too loud. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. "I did," I said, looking up at him. "Every Sunday. Every voicemail. Every missed call. You just weren't listening." He lowered his head. "I thought you'd always be there." "I was," I said. "Until I wasn't." That night, I sat on my porch in my rocking chair. The phone was quiet. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for it to ring. Because I had already said everything I needed to say. Loud enough for the whole world to hear. The day after the broadcast aired, my front porch looked like someone had opened the floodgates of a town's collective conscience. Baskets of muffins. Cards taped to my screen door. Flowers lined up on the railing. Some from strangers, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. And more than a few envelopes with handwritten notes that began with, "You made me call my mother today." Even the grocery clerk, Austin, the one with the wild tattoos and nose ring, stopped me in the canned goods aisle and whispered, "I saw it. The whole thing. You said what a lot of us can't." But that wasn't the reaction I cared about. I was waiting for the storm. It didn't take long to arrive. Lydia showed up the next evening. Furious, fuming, still dressed like she had just come from one of her yoga fundraiser PTA meetings. She didn't knock. She barged in. "You humiliated us," she snapped, tossing her purse on the couch like a gauntlet. "No," I said calmly, stirring my tea. "I told the truth. The cameras just gave you the volume you'd ignored for years. You made us look heartless." "I didn't make you anything," I said. "You chose not to call. You chose to forget." He paced, flustered. "Do you know how many texts I've gotten? People asking why I let my mother eat alone on her birthday. Caleb's job is threatening disciplinary action because the clip is everywhere." I sipped my tea and raised my eyebrows. "So now you know what it feels like to be ignored." Her face twisted. "You always play the martyr." "No, Lydia," I said, setting down my cup. "I spent 30 years being your mother. I gave you my time, my money, my energy. And when I needed something as small as a phone call, I got silence." She didn't respond. She just stood there, breathing hard, until she finally grabbed her purse again and stormed out. I didn't chase her. I didn't call after her. I'd done enough of that in my life. The next visitor came the day after. A knock this time. Hesitant. It was Reese. He looked smaller without his confidence. Without the armor of success. No phone in hand. Just him. He stood on the porch, eyes full of something that looked a lot like regret. "I deserved that," he said before I could speak. "Yes," I said. "You did." He didn't flinch. "I've been thinking about everything. About you. About me. About what happens when people get too busy for the ones who raised them." I said nothing. He looked down at his shoes. "I didn't mean to disappear." "I know," I said. "But you did." He sat beside me on the porch swing. "I watched the broadcast 5 times, he admitted. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to feel it. We sat in silence for a while. Then he asked, "Is it too late?" I turned to him. "It's too late for the will. That's filed. That's final." He nodded. Followed. "But it's not too late for Sunday," I added. "Not if you mean it." "I do." "Then I'll be here," I said. "Every Sunday at 2. Just like I used to be." That night I found myself smiling, not out of spite but out of relief. Because for once, I hadn't swallowed my truth. I'd served it hot, raw, and honest, and the world didn't burn. The world listened. Even Caleb called. A short, awkward voicemail. "I saw it. I deserved it. Sorry, Mom. I miss you." I didn't return it. Not yet. He'd have to earn that. The biggest surprise came a week later. I was invited to speak at the town hall. Apparently, my broadcast had inspired a local campaign called Call Your People. They wanted me to open the event. Me. Just a quiet widow from Marlow who used to wait by a silent phone. I stood at the podium in front of a full room. Old men, teenagers, young mothers, a boy in a wheelchair, a girl with tears in her eyes. I told them what I told the cameras. That love is not a word. It's not a caption. It's not an emoji or a forwarded quote on Mother's Day. It's presence. It's phone calls, home visits, showing up, being there not just for the holidays, but for the Tuesdays when your mother's joints ache or your father forgets where he left his glasses. It's calling before it's too late. Afterward, a young woman in her 20s approached me with trembling hands. I haven't spoken to my grandmother in 5 years, she said. She raised me. And I haven't called her in 5 years. Call her today, I said. She nodded, crying now. Thank you, she whispered. You reminded me. And that's when it hit me. This story, my story, wasn't just about grief. It was about reclaiming dignity. About reminding people that elders aren't just relics of the past. We're witnesses. We're the ones who remember. And sometimes, we're the only ones brave enough to tell the truth, loud enough for the silence to shatter. It was Sunday again, the 7th one since the broadcast. I sat on the porch in my usual chair, a warm mug of chamomile in my hands. No phone beside me. No expectation. Just the creak of the rocking chair and the distant hum of church bells from St. Mary's down the hill. It was peaceful. Not the kind of peace that comes from silence you didn't ask for, but the kind you fight for. The kind you reclaim after years of giving too much away. I had no idea what was coming. The first hint was the low rumble of an unfamiliar car engine pulling up beside the house. I didn't recognize it. A long silver sedan with dark windows and Tennessee plates. I stood slowly, gripping the railing as the driver's side door opened. Caleb stepped out. But he wasn't alone. Out of the passenger side came a boy I hadn't seen since he was in grade school. Eli, I whispered. My grandson. Caleb's son. The one I hadn't seen in nearly 9 years. He looked taller than I remembered. Broader. But his eyes were still the same, quiet and searching. He smiled nervously as he walked up the porch steps. Hi, Grandma. I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat felt tight. I just reached out, took his hand, and held it against my cheek like a prayer answered too late. Caleb cleared his throat. I owed you more than a voicemail, he said. I looked at him. Really looked. He didn't wear that guarded expression anymore. He looked stripped down, humbled. I watched the video. All of it. Twice, he said. And then I watched it again with Eli. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I was ashamed. As you should be, I said gently. He nodded. I thought you'd never want to see me again. I didn't, I said, still holding Eli's hand. But I never stopped hoping you'd come see me. He lowered his head. I'm not here to argue, he said. I just wanted to say thank you. For the way you raised me. For everything I didn't thank you for when I should have. Then he reached into his pocket. And pulled out a small black velvet box. I found this while cleaning out the attic last week, he said. I forgot I'd taken it after Dad's funeral. I was going to have it resized. But it didn't feel right. He opened the box. Inside was Samuel's wedding band. Worn. Simple. Gold. I hadn't seen it in years. I thought you should have it, Caleb said. I'm sorry I took it. I didn't even remember I had. I stared at it. That little circle of gold held so many years. Of love, of loss, of building something from nothing. Samuel had never taken it off. Not until they removed it in the hospital before the final breath. I reached for it, then stopped. No, I said. You keep it. His eyes widened. I what? You keep it, I repeated. Not because you've earned it, but because you're trying now. Because Eli deserves to know where he comes from. And because legacy is about doing better, not pretending you always did right. He looked like he was about to cry. So did I. Eli broke the silence. Can we stay for lunch? My heart stuttered. Of course. He smiled, then held up a grocery bag. We brought everything. Even sweet potatoes. Dad said those were your favorite. I nearly laughed. Only when they're roasted. Not mashed. He nodded solemnly. Duly noted. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen. I peeled. Caleb stirred. I directed from my stool by the window. Felt like breathing again after years of holding it in. Later, after dishes were done and Eli was outside tossing pebbles into the garden fountain, Caleb turned to me. I'm not here to ask about the will, he said. I know that's done. Gave him a look. But I want you to know, he continued. You changed me. That broadcast. It was like holding up a mirror I didn't want to see. And I know a performance can be forgotten, but truth sticks. And your truth stuck. I didn't say anything for a while. Then softly. I didn't do it to shame you. I know. I did it so I could die without regret. He looked startled. Don't say that. Smiled. We're all headed somewhere, Caleb. I just want to make sure I leave behind light, not shadows. He reached over and squeezed my hand. And for the first time in decades, I felt like a mother again. Not someone to be pitied or forgotten, but someone who had finally been heard. Weeks passed, then months. Reese called every Sunday now. Sometimes he even visited, brought new books, old jazz records, stayed the night on the pull-out couch. Lydia came too. Not as often. But she was different. Quieter, more intentional. She brought the twins once and sat with me while they played with old Lincoln logs in the living room. The will remained untouched. Filed. Final. But I didn't change it. Because I didn't need to. They weren't coming back for money anymore. They were coming back for me. And on my next birthday, the phone rang. Once. 3 times. Not with silence. But with voices. With singing. With happy birthday, Mom, and we love you, and save me a slice. And for the first time in so many years, I didn't feel forgotten. Felt found. Because sometimes it takes a microphone to amplify the ache. A camera to frame the truth. And one brave grandmother with a quiet heart to turn silence into a roar the world can't ignore. If Orlena's story spoke to you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Because maybe it's time we all picked up the phone before the silence becomes permanent. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.